Recovery begins with embracing our pain and taking the risk to share it with others. John Bradshaw. Thank you, ladies, for joining Twice That Mom, me, Samantha Cotter, on our online platform here. Yay, I'm so excited to share a bit with you today. And today I want to deal with matters of the heart. There is a reason and a way and a how we got to be single mamas, and this is something I would like to start addressing. I can never tell people what to do. I can share my journey, and hopefully when you hear and listen and see me sharing this with you, you learn perhaps from some of the mistakes I feel like I've made, or nullify some time that it's taken me to make it. You take the nuggets that work for you, you apply it in your current situation, in your here, in your now, and you share that then in turn when we pay forward to try to help others through this journey. I remember during my separation times from the man that I totally loved with my entire being, and during the time of separation you go through such extreme turmoil, but I remember mainly you go through denial. This is not happening in my life right now. No, I'm going to wake up and then tomorrow it's all going to be fixed like we were before, like the perfect family. I'm currently in a nightmare and this will dissolve and just poof, disappear. I never took ownership of that moment in that time of my reality. It took me months actually, even after I filed for divorce, even after he has moved on. I took so long to get to a point of taking ownership of the brokenness of the marriage, of the family, of the life as I knew it, that it took me longer than I wanted to get past and over the denial. And what happens is you feel so incredibly empty and lonely that you just fill your cup, whether it is with exercise or motherhood or learning to fix or overcome. You just fill this empty space that's within yourself. And what I have learned during my journey is, had I started the inner work a bit earlier, instead of filling my cup, breaking open, that's what is within me, perhaps I would have moved a little faster where it came to the inner healing. So what I would really want to do is share with my single mommies out there that's desperately seeking and searching to improve and grow. The people that I met online during podcasts that I filled my head with, the teachings that really helped me during this part. So I have to acknowledge John Bradshaw. He was an integral part of my inner healing process. And so what I've done is I've downloaded some of the teachings. I'm now presenting it to you, and I hope my journey as I unfold and share with you the people that I learn from is helpful. Thank you.
The idea is that this hierarchy of power, master-slave, repression of emotion, especially the emotion of anger and sexuality. So I want to talk about what happens when we grow up with rules like these. I've quoted Virginia Satir saying 96% of families are dysfunctional. People say, isn't that, did you say that? No, I didn't say that. I think they're all dysfunctional to some degree. We all come out of the same set of rules. So how can we not be? And I don't care about formal logic. All the birds could be flying in the wrong direction. That's possible. That is possible. So we want to look at what happens when a child is abused. I want to read you something from David Muir. That abuse is not natural, he says. That it does not appear spontaneously without contact or instruction from others. This means, of course, that the person involved with abuse could have been taught other behavior, that there are options which have been denied that person, and because of the narrowness and the one-dimensional quality of the world of abuse, I will argue that abuse represents a loss of knowledge about oneself and of the world, and a loss of freedom. See, that is what I argued in the family series, that children are wounded because children don't know what normal is. How would you know what normal parenting is? All you know is what is told you as normal parenting. And then when the pain is so great, you move out of the pain because it's too hard to stay in yourself when you're in that pain, and then you forget. And all children idealize their parents. You can't not do it. I couldn't have called a meeting and said with my little bags packed, Dad, you're an alcoholic, Mom, you're a co-alcoholic, I'm moving down the street. I couldn't do that. I had to idealize them and make them okay and me bad. That's what children do. So the abuse lasts a lifetime. That's what we're understanding. And because the defenses that we develop are so powerful, they become automatic and unconscious, and by the time you get to be an adult, you forget. You forget what happened. See, and the most dramatic example of that is incest, where, working with a woman in her 60s, she's suddenly starting to get to memories of her incest. That's not uncommon. So in the most extreme forms of abuse, sexual abuse, we know that people can forget for 50 years. They can go 50 years without remembering this stuff. And so we've got to get it that the truth of our childhood is enormously important to us. We better find out the truth of our childhood, because the child will remember. And what we're understanding is that childhood was a nightmare, that incest was commonplace, that children were considered to be little animals up till about age 7. That was the age of reason. So you whip them and beat them and spank them, and that's the way you get little animals to be trained properly. I remember hearing a woman say she had broken her son's spirit by the time he was 3 years old. This guy was this apathetic, passive-aggressive, alcoholic, who had had all the life beaten out of him, literally. So we're really beginning to understand that these rules reached their apex at Nuremberg. The inherent potential of a set of rules that said one person has power over other people, one person's the master, the rest are the slave, deny and repress emotions, sexually shame people. These are what these rules were that we've inherited. They reached their apex at Nuremberg. Obedience without content. Those Nazi murderers stood up and blushed when they missed the instruction to stand up, but they didn't blush when they read these lists of all the people they had killed. So obedience without content. So I believe that everybody's carrying what I call the spiritual wound. And the spiritual wound is that everybody needs to be loved for the very one they are. You need to be loved for the very one you are. There's nobody like you. There never has been anyone like you. There never will be anyone like you again. So we need to be loved for the very one we are. When we're not loved for our I am who I am, we're spiritually wounded. When Moses went to the bush, he said, "What's your name?" In the theophany of the burning bush, God said, "I am who I am." Every human being needs to be, "I am who I am." The second I tell you, "What are you laughing about?" There's nothing to laugh about. "What are you crying about?" There's nothing to cry about. Don't you ever raise your voice to me again. Don't you ever quit being such a ninny. I remember going downstairs one night and saying I was lonely, and they said, "You're not." "No, you're not." I went back up to my room, scratching my little head, going, "God, I must be weird. I could have sworn I was lonely." See, so it's incredible when we begin to look at the levels of abuse that we've come out of in normal families. And my premise is that normal parenting, as we've known it, that represses emotion, the no-talk rule, the no-feel rule, is abusive and shaming. Now, when you fall in love with somebody, guess what happens? You go back to primal gazing. You ever been around lovers? You're sitting there talking to them, and they're staring at each other, and you're going, hey, I'm here, can you see me? And it's wonderful. See, and a lot of people really are into love addiction. Because it's this wonderful mood alteration. When you're in your love, you're out of your gourd. You're oceanic. All the boundaries collapse. And you go back to this primal kind of oceanic oneness. You go back to infancy symbiotic bonding. You talk baby talk. So love addiction, a lot of addiction, lost child that you weren't accepted. Sort of the message to you was, get lost, child, that you were never accepted for the very one you were, and you knew it early on. See, children need to know how to matter. Some kids get it very early on that the way to matter around here is get lost. Play in your room, be quiet, don't make any noise, be invisible. In therapy, when we work with lost kids, they're often invisible. I'll say, where's Joe? He's right there in front of me. But somehow they have so got it that the only way I can stay here, the only way I'm wanted is if I get lost. So it's a very, very powerful kind of abuse that happens to people who didn't get their infancy needs met. Now, what do we do? How do we go back and claim this infant if you didn't get those needs met, if you're identifying with some of these indexes of suspicion? One of the ways I do this, some of you saw this in the program on original pain. Maybe you didn't see it, but it was one of the programs in this series where you saw powerful feelings being expressed. Well, I'm going to show you now some other ways to do this work, and we're going to start with a segment which is an age regression. Now, a lot of the contaminations of the wounded inner child are age regressions. When you're overreacting, when you're temper tantruming, when you're pouting, you're in age regressions. So don't let age regression scare you. Although when you see this work on here, you're just going to see a piece of it, and there's some cautions I would make. If a person is in therapy, working with a therapist, I wouldn't encourage you to try this kind of work on your own if you don't have your therapist's permission. If you've been pronounced mentally ill, this would not be a good thing to be doing on your own without some kind of guidance. I would say if this work scares you in any way, just don't touch it. Please don't touch it. The age regression is really something we do quite naturally. Milton Erickson used to say we go in and out of trance all day. Anytime you're in concentration, you're in a trance. That is, you're going into a trance. The importance of age regression is that up to about 6 or 7, we don't remember anything because we were in another state of consciousness. We were magical, we were non-logical, we were egocentric. We lived with felt thought. It was Winnie the Pooh and Tigger too. And we were barn comrades of bird, beast, and tree, and unself-conscious as the bee. So we have to do exercises to get us back in touch, to access the inner child. They said one catastrophic experience, if you're helpless, can change brain chemistry, can cause the hormones that are exuded in times of stress, almost like the on button gets stuck and you just keep having all this adrenaline surge. So you become hypervigilant. You're easily startled. You actually take on, Timon Chermak, a very brilliant psychiatrist, has shown us that children from dysfunctional families, where there is chronic, where there is trauma going on, have the same kinds of symptoms as post-traumatic stress disorder victims. Now, what is trauma to 2.5-year-olds? To somebody that's 5 times your height and 5 times your weight? What would trauma be when they're screaming at you, when they're hitting you, when they're making you go get belts and fly swatters and threatening you with what's going to happen to you and taking you down to police stations or burning your hands or we could go on, beating you, switching you, bending you over, stripping you naked, and you don't have any protection, and not only that, you can't even talk about it. You can't talk, you shut your mouth. Don't you open your mouth. You quit crying, I'll give you something to cry about. But listen to Alice Miller. My belief is, she says, that the abused inmates of a concentration camp are inwardly free to hate their persecutors. The opportunity to experience their feelings, even to share them with other inmates, prevents them from having to surrender their self. Because abused children, codependency is a disease of the developing self. You don't get to develop a self. This opportunity To talk to somebody and express it and cry about it and release the pain does not exist for children. They must not hate their father. They cannot hate him. They fear losing his love as a result. Thus, children, unlike concentration camp inmates, are confronted by a tormentor that they love. See, we're just beginning to understand the incredible consequences of this kind of stuff. I yelled at my children. That is abuse. That's offender behavior, rage, and I'm pained about it. I didn't understand it. I didn't know how to express anger. I didn't have any boundaries. And I'd be good guy, people-pleasing daddy till I couldn't take it anymore. Then I'd go crazy. And then I'd feel so bad. I'd feel so bad. Then I'd become good guy, people-pleasing daddy again. What children need more than anything, they need a model. Here's how. Here's how to be a man. Here's how to be a woman. Here's how to be a human being. Here's how to interact. Here's how to be intimate. I can't imagine anybody in my generation, I'm 57, can't imagine anybody in my generation seeing a man and woman who were absolutely equal. You cannot be intimate except on the basis of equality. And so most of us are growing up in families where we don't see intimacy. We see hierarchies of power, whereas intimacy is about shared power. The democratic revolutions, the French and the American revolutions, were revolutions that are bringing us to the awareness that we're beginning to get clearly right now. That every human being is equal, and every human being has rights, and that you can only predicate intimacy on the basis of equality. So you have trouble identifying your feelings. You don't know what you feel, because nobody modeled feelings for you. How could you name a feeling if nobody ever named it for you? Sometimes people think it's crazy when they've grown up without this, when they hear therapists saying, you say to the child, I see you're feeling angry. When they're obviously stomping around the kitchen. But it's enormously important. How would I know how to name? I'm going to talk a little later on about abuse. Children don't know what abuse is. Children don't even know they're being abused. How could they know it? All they know is what's happening to them. Interpersonal communication problems. Think about your mom and dad here. How well did they communicate? How well did they ask for what they wanted and listen to each other and do active and passive listening? What I hear you saying, Jack, is. What I hear you saying, Jill, is. And here's concrete, specific behavioral detail. Yeah, now, in all fairness, who would they have learned it from? I keep talking about these survivalistic models that we come out of. So, difficulty expressing, no talk, no feel rules, responsibility for the reality of others. This is what I'm going to call toxic guilt. You don't think you have a right to your own life. You don't think you have a right to your own health. Your family's still all messed up and you're doing real well and you feel guilty all the time. I see a lot of you grinning. It's like, see, toxic guilt is a thin veneer of codependency. It's like, I don't have a right to separate. I just want to focus for 1 second on adolescence, because adolescence is a kind of coming together of all those childhood stages. It's a time of great kind of vulnerability, a lot of pain in adolescence, because that's when you really first start noticing, the whole sexual thing. There's a kind of sensitivity. So I talk about adolescence as the in-between age, so it's the tween age, but it's really the bridge to adulthood, and it's about identity. It's kind of the really establishing of an identity that's based on our childhood foundation. Suppose you hit adolescence and you have never gotten a sense of trust, you have a lot of toxic shame, you have a lot of toxic guilt, and you have inferiority. Now, what kind of an identity is this adolescent going to have? He's going to start developing a negative identity. Like when I hit adolescence, all my shadow side came out. I was this good, wonderful boy that the nuns loved, and I had press in the neighborhood because I was such a good kid. I hit adolescence, man, I found all these guys from broken homes. We were in brothels at 13, drinking. I had alcoholic blackouts by the time I was 15. See, I went into all this negative identity or counter-identity. See, a way to have an identity is be different than all these squares. You know, to be a rebel, to be reactive, not to be, you know, I remember we used to sit there and drink and talk about all these funky people, you know, that had jobs and were respectable and all this kind of stuff. Now, toward the end of adolescence, though, I'm still a wounded child, so how am I going to find an identity? Well, in my system, I had been a star and a caretaker. So guess what? At 21, I go to be a priest. Here's a way to solve all the problems. Here's a way to solve it all. This is the way that I can establish an identity. But do you see that it isn't really an identity? It's part of this false self, good guy, people-pleasing, caretaking act that I had been in all my life. Because you see, as a child, every child is trying to figure out, how do I matter here? How do I matter in this family? Well, the way I mattered was by being a caretaker. The way I mattered at school was by being the president of every class, and I won medals. And so by becoming an achiever, on graduation night, I won all these medals, a standing ovation. I was a raving alcoholic at 18. But you see, in our culture, we love super achievers. We pay performers a lot of money. We pay first grade teachers almost nothing. I remember reading Nietzsche, that I wrote my master's thesis on Nietzsche. And I read this passage in there, and he said, I could only believe in a God who dances. If these people want me to believe in their God, they're going to have to sing me better songs. They're going to have to look more like people who've been saved. They're going to have to wear on their countenance the joy of the Beatitudes. You know, and it was a very harsh indictment, and it was a big judgment, but I love the idea of a God who dances, of a celebration, of life being wonderful. One of our other programs, we talked about the wonderful child. In a subsequent program, I'm going to talk about finding your wonder child. That's that naive, optimistic little person that just loves life. I mean, kids can play all day. And there's a part of us that wants to play. And we need to give ourselves permission to play and have fun. You have a right to have all the fun you can, to just enjoy. And also we have to give this kid permission for sexual play. Now, within your moral limits, please don't misunderstand that, somebody. Within your moral limits, it is really great to be able to play, and one form of adult play is sexual play. One of the places that many of us have been shamed is sexually. We have massive sexual addiction in this culture because of the sexual shame. That so many people have absolutely been decimated about their sexuality. You know, the day I found my nose, it was rejoicing in the family. That, you know, there was this, they were calling in neighbors saying, show them your nose. I'm a little bitty kid, I'm cute. Nose. They think that's adorable. Then one day I found my elbow. Let's show so-and-so your elbow. And then I found my navel one day. And they wanted me to show the navel, and I was really knocking people out. And then one Sunday, and I thought, look, man, if the nose got him, this is really going to get him. Never have I been taken out of a room faster. And this big guy looking at me and saying, don't you ever take that out again. So we wonder why disorder of desire is the #1 sexual problem in marriage. So you see, I mean, you grow up in this family that has no genitals. And this is very, very scary. Because look, the mobile, you remember the mobile? Sometimes the mobile is affected when nothing's there. See, when people are denying If I came out on this stage and I started walking around with this manila folder strapped to my groin, and you're going, "Hi folks, how you going tonight?" What is the first thing you would notice? See, when you come out of a family that has no sexuality in it, that is going to impact you very, very powerfully. So it's very important that we work on giving that child permission, exploring that in a healthy way, in a very protected way, but in a way that allows you to really develop. Also, the inner child needs protection, because when you first start this work, it's like there's a part of your head that when you get all this family system stuff and you really begin to understand it, it's kind of shocking at first. You know, it's like I've had people write me out of the family series and they say, "You ruined my childhood. I had this great childhood until you came along." You know, I'm sorry about that. I'm not trying to ruin anybody's childhood. We're trying to heal the child so that we can have this child in our life. And we've spent several programs looking at all that painful feeling work that you have to go through, I think, to finish the past. You can't finish something unless you grieve it. Now that we've grieved it and we've reclaimed the child, now we begin to re-champion the child, or champion the child, or reparent the child, and to begin to give this child the kind of nurturing that the child never got. Now, in the process, we need protection, because there's a part of my kid that goes, "Wait a minute, you know, I don't know whether I trust these new people, or these people that are writing, or these things I'm reading. I know when I read Alice Miller, I really get it, and then I go away and little voices come on and say, 'Now, wait a minute, you didn't have that bad a childhood. You had 3 squares and a roof over your head. Let's don't get carried away here.'" And some of you know very well, like when you're working on sexual addiction, or you're working on sexual abuse or physical abuse, how at first when you start getting to memories, it seems like, well, wait a minute, you know, maybe I'm just making this up. See, I see some of your heads nodding. And then gradually you begin to get it that, whoa, wait a minute. And all these pieces start coming together as you find out the truth of your childhood. So in the process, we need protection, because it's very scary to the child to leave home. Some of you may remember the program we did where we did the homecoming meditation. And I said, you're standing there with your child and you see your parents come out on the porch. Tell them goodbye and start walking. Well, when we do this in the workshops, oh man, people just start wailing, because it's very scary to leave those parents. And in a sense, my hope is you leave in order to go back. That is, you leave in order to have a relationship with them. I have the best relationship with my mother that I've ever had. I held my father on his deathbed. Even though we didn't have much of a relationship, we had as much as we could have at the end. So the goal here is not to say I'm never going to have anything to do with my family again. It is to leave so that I can become the person I was meant to be, that I can build my own boundaries, have my own life, and then I can choose what kind of relationship I want to have with that family. And hopefully you will want to have a relationship. You love them. You do want to have a relationship with them.
We can only truly grow when we share from within our vulnerability and find release and light in that. Strength to you, mamas out.